Officer Greg Matthews receives a call. It was a cold and misty evening when Officer Greg Matthews received an unusual call. The old cemetery on the outskirts of town was rumored to be abandoned, yet someone had reported strange noises coming from within. A faint cry, like that of a baby, had been heard echoing through the empty gravestones. Greg didn't believe in ghost stories, but something about the caller's trembling voice made him uneasy. He grabbed his flashlight, pulled his coat tighter around him, and made his way to the cemetery. The iron gates creaked as he pushed them open, revealing a landscape of cracked tombstones and overgrown grass. Then he heard it. A soft, desperate cry. His heartbeat quickened. He swept his flashlight across the cemetery, eyes darting from one shadow to another. Then he saw something that made him freeze. A dog. The animal stood protectively over something, its body tense, its eyes sharp. The moment Greg stepped forward, the dog let out a low growl, a warning. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Greg, easy buddy, I'm here to help." The dog didn't budge. That's when Greg aimed his flashlight lower and gasped. Beneath the dog, nestled in a torn blanket, was a tiny baby. Greg's stomach twisted in shock. Someone had left a newborn here in the middle of an abandoned cemetery with nothing but this stray dog to guard it. He reached for his radio. "Greg, dispatch, this is Officer Matthews. I need immediate medical assistance at Oak Ridge Cemetery. I found an abandoned infant. Alive." The baby whimpered, its tiny fists clenching against the cold air. Greg took off his jacket and carefully wrapped it around the child, but the moment he tried to lift the baby, the dog let out another warning growl. Greg looked at the dog, truly seeing him for the first time. He was a German shepherd mix, ribs visible beneath his dirty fur. He looked exhausted, yet determined, like he had been guarding this child with every ounce of strength he had. "Greg, you've been taking care of the baby, haven't you?" The dog whimpered softly, lowering its head to nuzzle the baby before stepping back slightly, as if understanding that Greg was here to help. Minutes later, the sound of sirens broke the eerie silence. Paramedics rushed in, carefully taking the baby into their arms. Greg watched as the infant was placed into a warm, secure blanket. The baby was weak, but alive. But Greg couldn't stop thinking about the dog. "Greg, what about him?" One of them shook their head. "Paramedic, probably just a stray that stumbled upon the baby," but Greg knew better. This dog hadn't just stumbled upon the baby. He had protected it, kept it warm, and refused to leave its side. Greg knelt down and extended his hand. "Greg, come on, buddy, you did good." For the first time, the dog hesitated. He glanced at the baby one last time before stepping forward, pressing his nose into Greg's palm. Greg made a decision right then and there. He wasn't leaving this dog behind. The next day, news of the heroic stray spread like wildfire. People wanted to know how a dog had saved an abandoned infant. But the real shock came when the authorities identified the baby's parents. The child had been missing for 2 days. His mother had been found unconscious after a home invasion, and his father had been frantically searching for him. Whoever had taken the baby had left him to die in the cemetery, but by some miracle, this stray dog had found him first. Greg sat in his office. The dog, whom he had now named Guardian, curled up beside him. When the baby's parents arrived at the hospital, they broke down in tears, unable to believe their child had survived against all odds. And all because of a dog. Greg smiled, scratching Guardian behind the ears. "Greg, you really are a hero, aren't you?" The dog wagged his tail, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. And from that day forward, Guardian was no longer a stray. He had found his home with Greg, the man who had seen the true worth of a protector who had saved a life in the most unexpected place.